Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Geneva. We seek to meet you wherever you are on your journey and invite you to be part of this congregation in which we draw wisdom from all the world's religions, balanced with the insights of modern science. We seek to build a diverse, beloved community within our virtual walls and hope to inspire and accompany one another as we act for peace and justice in our larger world. Today's meditation comes from the Reverend Gary Kowalski, which he called Graduation. He writes, "Ever since I graduated from college, I have had a recurring dream. My wife has had it too, as well as a lot of people I know. In my dream, it is time to take an exam, and I am unprepared. I have not gone to classes all semester. I failed to do the reading. Usually, I am even a little confused about the subject matter. What was being taught? Who was teaching? What was I supposed to learn? No answers are provided. And now it is too late to make up for lost time. With a sense of catastrophe approaching, I realize that I am about to be tested and I haven't a clue how to pass." What is the meaning of this particular dream? I was never that nervous about taking tests in real life because I was a fairly good student. Why does it seem to be a fixture of our collective unconscious? Surely it concerns something more than lingering classroom jitters. I think it is a dream about the great examination that each of us must face. The items on the exam are the ultimate questions. Who am I? What do I want? What am I afraid of? To whom or to what am I committed? Where is my highest good calling me? This is not a dream about academic anxieties or forgetting the dates of the Magna Carta. It's about forgetting our own reason for being. We have one lifetime that we know about, and no makeups are allowed. Is it any wonder we are all tossing and turning in our sleep? By the time morning comes, we have to be ready to give some account for ourselves. Sooner or later, we have to answer for how we chose to spend our lives. Amen. I think my kids are on to me. There's this moment, everything's going fine. They're talking to me, sharing thoughts, not just what I did today, but what I think about this or that. And at some point, I must do or say or something, I don't know what. Because a tiny bit of dread creeps into their voices. And they ask, "Are we philosophizing?" "Dad, duh!" Oh, and that is the end of that. Professor David Hills once described philosophy as, quote, "the ungainly attempt to tackle questions that come naturally to children using methods that come naturally to lawyers." Maybe this explains my children's exasperation. I wonder if the people of Athens ran the other way when they saw Socrates walking towards them. "No thanks, we've got all the philosophy we need." I can't remember my first real philosophical argument or whether or not I was a particularly annoying child. My brother and sister claim to remember, but seriously, they are not trustworthy. Now, thinking back on it, I can't even remember why I took that first philosophy class. But I do remember reading Plato's dialogues and thinking to myself, wow, this is way more interesting than circuit design or particle dynamics. philosophy, philein, the Greek verb meaning to love, Sophia, Greek for wisdom. Philosophers were lovers of wisdom. For the ancients, philosophy wasn't passive or remote or static, something once written and then never after disturbed. It was it was like a game, a sport, an activity, something you did with your time. You farmed, you fought, you made stuff, you philosophized. Welcome to Athens. As a grad student, I remember my advisor asking what I wanted to write my dissertation about, and I said, the meaning of life. He snorted at me, literally snorted, and said, seriously, kid, what are you going to say that Plato and Aristotle didn't? Well, definitely not supportive. It was a good question, and one that I've pushed around for 30 years, like Sisyphus with his rock. And this month, we're exploring the Soul Matters theme of living with intention. And as I've said these last few weeks, January is a great time to pause and re-examine the trajectory that our lives happen to be taking. It's our tradition to offer up resolutions like little carrots in the hopes that we might, through some small and simple changes, increase our happiness, improve our lot, and live out our life, maybe just a bit more in line with our hopes, dreams, and ideals. It's worth noting that this kind of pause, shift, redirect thing is entirely countercultural. It was uncomfortable in Athens for 100 some years before the advent of Jesus of Nazareth. It's uncomfortable today. Being intentional can be an act of defiance. Life, well, at least our professional lives, do not really reward a whole lot of navel gazing. That's the way my dad used to describe it. My more cynical friends have put it this way. You're hired to do a job, you do that job well, and your reward for that is the gift of being able to keep doing it. Head down, work hard, work long. That's life. How dare we ask for more? How audacious! But is that a good life? And what is good anyway? And why should I care? My old friend, Ferris Bueller, put it best. He said, quote, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Which makes this an excellent time to do our thing. So if you haven't activated your camera, or if you've deactivated it momentarily, now is a great time to turn it back on. With the mics still muted, I'm going to remove the Zoom spotlight. Boop. And what I want you to do is interact with that screen in front of you. Go find the button, that little tiny button that says View, maybe up in the right-hand corner. Click that, pull down to Gallery. You'll know it's right because your screen will fill up with a bazillion little boxes. Now, this is your community, and looking at your community, and in the spirit of our friend, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III of Trinity Church here in Chicago, who has no idea I invoke every single Sunday, I want you to turn to a neighbor, doesn't matter, pick one, pick a little box, and say to that neighbor, neighbor, oh neighbor, as good as we can. Thank you. Amen. All right. Have you ever asked yourself, this is the quiz part of the sermon, have you ever asked yourself, what does a good life even mean these days? Why should I be good when others very clearly are not? And assuming I want to be good, how good do I have to be? I think these are all excellent questions. Each one is at least a sermon, if not a dissertation, but it's at least a term paper, right? So there, Professor. So in the spirit of American exceptionalism and chronic overfunctioning, let's knock them down. Herbert Hoover, in his 1928 presidential campaign, promised Americans, quote, a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. Good stuff. His campaign also said, quote, wages, dividends, progress, and prosperity. That's what you were voting for when you voted for him. The Great Depression started the very next year, so this didn't really work out so well. But the good life does seem a bit variable. I think that's pretty much taken as read these days. It's time dependent, society dependent, maybe even person dependent. Maybe so. Many intellectuals, pundits, social critics, and yes, even philosophers would clearly and cheerfully offer up that universal claims about good, about life, about meaning, these are all so personal, so intersectional, so postmodernist that we really can honestly say nothing. Nothing universal, maybe nothing at all. And I have an answer for this, and I want to encourage you to practice saying with me. Ready? Balderdash and poppycock. You have my permission to use that phrase whenever you might need it. Being good, it turns out, is actually not that hard to study with the tools of modern science. And this may be a surprise to you. But as it turns out, with a regularity that would make a postmodernist shudder, there are things that we can say about human beings and how we respond to doing good. For most people, when asked what it is we want more of, what we want out of life, what a good life is or should be, we tend to mention one thing. Happiness. We want to be happy. What do we want more of? More happiness. We want to feel happiness. Whether or not this is what we ought to frame our lives around is another thing entirely, but the pursuit of happiness seems to be a universal. And it turns out doing good tends to make people measurably happier. There are dozens of scientific studies that show a direct causal link between, for example, service and personal happiness, between doing good and feeling good. That is, there is a measurable, quantifiable value to the self in doing things for others. Interestingly, doing good encourages others to do the same. That acts of kindness like charity, love, empathy, and compassion, doing good, they spread. I like that. But the bottom line is this. When we do things that help others, on average, we have a much better shot at being happy. And that sounds pretty good. Good for goodness sake. Seriously, this is some cool research, and I encourage you to explore a bit and let that research maybe inspire you. Today's first homework assignment. You're welcome. Now, I'm not saying that you should quit your job, though the Wall Street Journal is pretty sure everyone is considering it. However, if you are considering such a thing, it may be interesting to know that some of the happiest jobs, and yes, that is a thing, some of the happiest jobs are those jobs that help others grow, build, learn, heal. Let me say that another way. All things being equal, the careers with the highest reported levels of happiness are those where we get to help other people become, well, whatever it is that they need, want, or aspire to become. Teachers, healthcare workers, engineers, even clergy. Like I said, all things being equal. It is also pretty cool. It's also kind of counterintuitive if you think about it, because service to others is not what we lift up in American culture, is it? More good people have bad things happen to them all the time. Happiness is great and all, but do-gooders are rarely rewarded with fame or fortune. Instead, many of us believe, and deeply believe, that a good life is one where we're not happy, we are successful, where we accomplish things, where we are the idol, the celebrity, the athlete, the award winner, the CEO, the leader. And we know that we are taught that to make it to the top, to win, sometimes shortcuts are required. We're taught that good guys don't finish first. It's achieve or be forgotten. To be a winner requires that someone else is a loser. Collateral damage must be expected. And we can look around and see all over evidence that good things happen to bad people on the regular. In fact, if we spend any longer than 15 minutes on Netflix, we will realize that beyond all the amoral ladder climbers out there, folks bent on clawing their way to fame and fortune, there are also a great many of our friends and neighbors that are not only not good, but in fact are quite bad and probably actively plotting someone else's demise. Seriously, never go to England. The sheer number of murders that happen in those small, quaint villages, it's appalling. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes once quipped that, left to our own devices, human life would be nasty, brutish, and short. We clearly need leaders, strong people to show the rest of us the right way, the right path. And if we have to break a few eggs to make a delicious omelet out of life, well, so what? Yeah. As a Unitarian Universalist, I smell a rat. We human beings have a lot of ways to justify our own crappy behavior, and claiming that everyone else is violent, self-interested, broken, and needy is a time-honored step toward justifying their oppression, suppression, and subjugation. At this point in history, we know that this is also nonsense. Nonsense with a pedigree, but nonsense. 200 years ago, our philosophical and religious ancestors said that running around and threatening people with the hell stick was lousy theology. Weird as it may have sounded to the Spanish Inquisition, we just don't need God to be good. We know God, the universe, human nature, wherever we place our faith. That thing demands more from us than our fear of each other. Now, the work of Aristotle is not something I'd recommend as light reading. It's a little dense, but he does offer some interesting and provocative ideas for thinking about the good. And if we're to use this season as an opportunity to consider some maybe minor course corrections to our lives, one that maybe refocus us more on our hopes, dreams, and ideals, well, we could actually do a lot worse than Aristotle. It does require a shift away from the notion of just doing good to becoming good. You may remember a sermon or two ago when I talked about orthopraxy, right practices. And we contrasted that with orthodoxy, right beliefs. Orthopraxy, orthodoxy. It's quite popular these days to say that actions in the world are more important than thoughts in our heads. Deeds over creeds. You may recall that I also suggested that this is one of the reasons why activists, like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., have demanded that our inner life not be prioritized over someone else's outer life. This is a good reminder, I think. But it's also a little troubling because while it's true good actions can and do create good and new thinking, If you have no vision, no ideals, no aspirations of your own, you're just asking someone to come along and do that work for you. And who knows what you end up with. Aristotle suggests that we do that work, and that doing that inner work is actually also doing the outer work at the same time. In fact, it is exactly the doing of that work that is the work of a good life. That virtue is what should fill the hierarchy of personal aspiration. For Plato, virtue was something remote, abstract, universal, something we could only ever approach but never really realize. For Aristotle, virtue is a bit more accessible, informed by context, time, place, precedent, consequence, identity, but still an ideal, an aspiration, something we strive for and don't always get right. We are human, after all. But it was by our aspirations, by practicing virtue, by making our lives into temples to virtue, we approach the divine. For Aristotle, this is what being good, doing good, what the meaning of life is. This is happiness. So for Aristotle, the question isn't, should I be good, but how good do we have to be? His answer is clear. As good as we can. For Aristotle, the virtues he was most concerned with were piety, temperance, courage, justice, wisdom. There are others too. I'm personally quite fond of compassion, charity, and creativity, for example. Perhaps you have a few virtues that sit close to your heart. I suspect you do. Maybe in this annual moment of life's reconsiderations, as we try to live more with intention, maybe it's time to lift one or two of them up. I hope that the philosophy professors listening will forgive me for giving away Aristotle's punchline, but there is a virtue that stands out from the others. One that sits above them, one that fills the others, gives them depth and scope and color, one from which all of the others flow. The ultimate virtue, the virtue to which everyone ought to aspire. You probably already know. It's wisdom. This is, after all, philosophy, the love of wisdom. And how do we acquire wisdom? At the risk of being completely circular, we practice philosophy. My kids are probably groaning at me right now. Dad! Aristotle's point, I believe, is that a life well lived, a good life, a happy life, is one that is aimed at the good. It's a life that's also lived in humility, where questions are more important than answers. Good questions yield good answers, and good answers always generate better questions. Annoying as it sounds to my kids, it is in the asking of good questions and then living those questions out and staying true to the ideals that gave rise to the questions and letting the questions evolve your ideals. That's the path of virtue. Philosophy will change us, refine us, and help us become more than we are. Aristotle may not be where I'd start. There are a lot of great books to start with if you're interested, if you're curious. And if you are, I actually happen to know a couple of philosophy professors that we might want to ask. More homework! And we should ask. We should want to ask. We should want to, because asking is reaching, and reaching is living. Life is change and growth and learning, and this is how we cultivate wisdom. Wisdom is the embrace of that holy question mark, a continuing commitment to the ongoing revelation that is the center of human life and meaning. Is there really anything more aspirational than that? Philosophy is our gift, given to us as seekers after truth and goodness. given by the gods, perhaps by evolution, perhaps by virtue itself, perhaps. But however we got here, by hook, by crook, by happy accident, or by deliberate intention, wisdom is the fountain we drink from, where we drink and are made new, where we discover the truth which can set us free. Amen. And as we prepare to leave this place, continue your journey in love. Care for one another and care for this, our earth. Do justice and make peace. And as you go, know that whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and virtual place of hope, joy, love, peace, the whisper and promise of wisdom, that goes with you out into the world. We are different for having spent this time together. So remember, live boldly and with thanksgiving. And when you go, go in peace.